many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to start off talking about the debates, the Republican debates hosted by Fox Business. And the way this debate compared to most of them, even the other Fox debate that they had, was the way questions were asked, and they kind of softened down on any of the attacking the way past debates were. But what kind of amazed me was people like Rand Paul were able to actually get some decent based punches in there. And I have one here. This is from Vanity Fair, actually. Rand Paul shuts down Donald Trump moderators and commercial breaks. It says here, a little more than an hour into Tuesday night's GOP presidential primary debate, most of the Republican hopefuls were ready for a commercial break. Most of the moderators were too, so were the majority of viewers, and certainly the advertisers who paid a pretty penny for their spots to air. But Rand Paul and debate moderator and Wall Street Journal editor Jared Baker had another idea. Just before the planned break on Fox Business Network, Baker asked Donald Trump about the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, the full text of which was released last week. Trump gave a long-winded reply in which he referred to as a horrible bill several times and spent the bulk of time bringing up how China is leaving America in the dust. It's a deal that was designed to lead China to come in, as they always do, through the back door and totally take advantage of everyone, he said. When Trump finally concluded, Paul piped up, "Hey, Jared," he said, "we might want to point out that China is not part of this deal." He was correct. The crowd began to cheer, and at the same time, the sweet, sweet music leading up to a commercial break started to play. But no music could stop Baker or Paul, who were swept away in the moment of trapping Trump in his own China tirade. Baker spouted on with his follow-up question as the music quietly droned on, like an Oscar winner who rattled about his momager, and the motivational quotes that got him through tough times as the Academy gently played him off stage. Fellow moderator Maria Bartiromo shot him a whole lot of side-eye to her left. Neil Cavito's face strained. None of this stopped Paul, who didn't seem to give a hoot about any of that. As he began to respond to Baker's question, the network stopped the music, resigning to the fact that the commercial break would have to wait until Paul finished his assessment on why China wouldn't like the TPP deal and how we should be careful in giving so much power to the presidency. The music and the color returned to Rameau's face as he finished, and at long last, the public got to view the very expensive commercials. Everyone, especially Paul, but maybe not Trump, could go to break happy. And I'm going to go ahead and cue up a highlight, Rand Paul highlights from the Fox Business GOP debate here. And then we'll get into some more articles. And it looks like Rand Paul in the Fox poll is leading 25% to Mark Rubio's 22%, to Donald Trump's 21%, and Ted Cruz 19%. Jeb Bush is 1, John Kasich is 2, and Carly Fiorina 4%. And in the Drudge report poll, Trump's leading. Behind Trump is Cruz, and behind Cruz is Paul. And the next one behind Paul would be Rubio. And we'll get into some more articles here after these highlights, but what I thought was pretty interesting is watching mainstream media. A lot of them even mention something about Carson, not Paul. And it was pretty funny with them trying to dance around Paul. And there's a reason he's still on stage, even though they don't want to give him media coverage. But let's go ahead and get to this. And everybody knows I look at Rand Paul as the best of the worst, because I believe government to just inherently be corrupt. But again, if we want a peaceful route to freedom, we have to look at the Constitution as a path, not a end all. We need that gradual back to personal liberties, personal freedom, and personal responsibility, rather than towards the socialist where everybody's held responsible for all the bad deeds of others. And we'll get into some more of that, but let's go ahead and cue these highlights up.
Thank you. Senator Paul, income inequality has been rising in the United States. 50 years ago, for example, the average CEO of a big corporation in this country earned 20 times the average salary of one of his or her workers. Today, that CEO earns about 300 times the average salary of a worker. Does it matter at all that the gap between the rich and everyone else is widening?
Absolutely, and I think that we ought to look where income inequality seems to be the worst. It seems to be worst in cities run by Democrats, governors of states run by Democrats, and countries currently run by Democrats. So the thing is, let's look for root causes. But I would also lay some blame at the feet of the Federal Reserve. I think the Federal Reserve has made this problem worse. By artificially keeping interest rates below the market rate, average ordinary citizens have a tough time earning interest, have a tough time making money. They're actually talking now about negative interest. The money as it's created through quantitative easing or other means tends to start out in the big banks in New York. And because we're now paying interest for them to keep the money there, much of that money has not filtered out into the economy. So what we're finding is there is increasing income disparity and income inequality. We also find that as the Federal Reserve destroys the value of the currency, what you're finding is that if you're poor, if you make $20,000 a year and you have 3 or 4 kids and you're trying to get by, as your prices rise or as the value of the dollar shrinks, these are the people that are hurt the worst. So really, we need to re-examine whether we want a Federal Reserve that's involved so much in determining interest rates. We also need to look at root causes as to what caused the housing boom and the housing collapse. But the bottom line is, if you want less income inequality, move to a city with a Republican mayor or a state with a Republican governor.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we're only just getting... Thank you very much. Senator Paul, you said you want to blow up the tax code and start over with an across-the-board 14.5% fair and flat tax. You happily offer that it is not revenue neutral, and that's the idea. You want to choke off the amount of money coming into Washington. But don't you risk creating a near-term budget crisis, just as your presidency would be beginning?
Well, it's a great question, Neil, and thanks for including me in the tax debate. I think what's important about the tax debate is that we have to ask the question, where is money best spent? In the private sector and the government sector. I want a government really, really small, so small you can barely see it. So I want lower taxes and much more money in the private sector. My tax plan, however, is the only tax plan among any of the candidates on the stage that is part of a balanced budget plan. I put forward 3 plans that actually balance the budget over a 5-year period. Each of these plans have details on exactly where we'd cut. The question came up earlier, where would you cut? Nobody likes to say where they would cut. I've put pencil to paper and done 3 budgets that actually balance.
I want to stop it right there and talk about, he mentioned, I want a government so small that you can barely see it, and he's talking about the federal government. And I want you to take a second and just think about now how many local law enforcement, definitely usually city police forces, now run around with DHS on their vehicles. And even some counties roll around with DHS on their vehicles because they have been federalized. So when we talk about how large the federal government has gotten, that they are federalizing local police as Department of Homeland Security operatives, basically. So now you have a federal police force. Not only is it unlike your sheriff's department where you can elect your sheriff, the local chief is appointed by the mayor. And it seems that these mayors and the federal government tend to cooperate a lot with each other rather than them cooperating with the city council, which they do. And, there's corruption at all levels, but it's much easier for them at the city levels. And we tend to see larger cities are usually Democratic ran. It's one of those things that you look at it, and the federal government basically has bought out most large cities in most states because they are appointed and they federalize with the government. So now you have federal police force instead of really a local police force. Again, that's why the sheriff, I think, is very, very important, definitely in these times where we can see where sheriffs have stepped in. And we need more of that, so that, again, I always think that the best part of the election is the election of sheriffs rather than anyone else. But we have to make steps because we really see where this nation's going. And we'll get into some of the PC stuff here in a little bit, but let's back to the highlights.
Also in favor of a plan called the penny plan, where we'd just cut 1% across the board, and that budget actually balances in less than 5 years. So I think what's extraordinary about my tax plan is it is in the context of balancing the budget. What's also extraordinary about my tax plan is it gets rid of the payroll tax. Democrats demagogue this issue to death, and when they do, they say, a millionaire would get a bigger tax cut than someone making $10,000. That's proportionality, as Ben's trying to explain to folks. But the thing is if we get rid of the payroll tax, everybody's going to get a tax cut. And this is something that I think the public at large will support and could win an election.
There are no deductions under your plan?
Ours is 14.5% for corporations, 14.5% for individuals, no payroll tax for the employee, the business tax pays for Social Security, and there would be two remaining deductions, home mortgage and charity.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. A point that I'd like to make about the tax credits, we have to decide what is conservative and what isn't conservative. Is it fiscally conservative to have $1 trillion expenditure? We're not talking about giving people back their tax money. He's talking about giving people money they didn't pay. It's a welfare transfer payment. So here's what we have. Is it conservative to have $1 trillion in transfer payments, a new welfare program that's a refundable tax credit? Add that to Marco's plan for $1 trillion in new military spending, and you get something that looks to me not very conservative.
Thank you. Governor Casey.
No,
Let me come to Governor Casey. Governor Casey.
Excuse me, I get to respond.
Very quickly, Senator.
No, I get my 60 seconds to respond. He's talking about my tax plan.
Please.
So let me begin with this. I actually believe, first of all, this is their money. They do pay. It is refundable, not just against the taxes they pay to the government, but also on their federal income tax. It's refundable against the payroll tax. Everyone pays payroll tax. This is their money. This is not our money. And here's what I don't understand. If you invest that money in a piece of equipment, if you invest that money in a business, you get to write it off your taxes. But if you invest it in your children, in the future of America, in strengthening your family, we're not going to recognize that in our tax code. The family is the most important institution in
Nevertheless,
society.
it's not
and yes,
very
I do want to rebuild the American
Marco.
military.
How's it conservative?
I know that Rand is a committed isolationist. I'm not. I believe the world is a stronger and a better place when the United States is the strongest military power in the world.
Marco, how is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion expenditure for the federal government that you're not paying for? How is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion in military expenditures? You cannot be a conservative if you're going to keep promoting new programs that you're not going to pay for.
I may respond more quickly.
Very quickly, Senator.
We can't even have an economy if we're not safe. There are radical jihadists in the Middle East beheading people and crucifying Christians. A radical Shia cleric in Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon. The Chinese taking over the South China Sea. Yes, I believe the world is a safer... No, I don't believe. I know that the world is a safer and better place when America is the strongest military power in the world.
Marco, I don't think we're any safer. I do not think we are any safer from bankruptcy court. As we go further and further into debt, we become less and less safe. This is the most important thing we're going to talk about tonight. Can you be a conservative and be liberal on military spending? Can you be for unlimited military spending and say, oh, I'm going to make the country safe? No, we need a safe country. But you know, we spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined. I want a strong national defense, but I don't want us to be bankrupt.
Well, and there is a middle ground. There is a middle ground
to this country.
Hey, Gerard, you know, we might want to point out China's not part of this deal.
Yeah.
True. It's true. Yeah.
That's right.
Before we get a little bit off kilter
isn't that part of the problem, if I may say, Senator, that if this deal is not ratified by the US, by the Senate, then it would actually give China an opportunity to grow its economic leadership, which it's been seeking to do. And if the US is unable to take part in this trade deal with these countries in Asia, China will take the lead.
There is an argument that China doesn't like the deal because in us doing the deal, we'll be trading with their competitors. You're exactly right. But I think we've sort of missed the point a little bit here. There is an important point, though, about how we discuss these trade treaties that I do agree with Mr. Trump on. We should negotiate from a position of strength, and we also should negotiate using the full force and the constitutional power that was given to us. I think it's a mistake that we give up power to the presidency on these trade deals. We give up the power to filibuster, and I'm kind of fond of that power. We give up the power to amend. And I think really one of the big problems we have in our country is over the last century, really, so much power has gravitated to the executive branch. Really, Congress is kind of a bystander. We don't write the rules. We don't make the laws. The executive branch does. So even in trade, and I am for trade, I think we should be careful about giving so much power to the presidency.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Senator.
Senator Paul. Now, Senator Paul, you have already said, sir, that would be a mistake in not talking to Vladimir Putin or to rule it out. You've argued that it's never a good idea to close down communication. With that in mind, do you think the same applies to administration efforts right now to include the Iranians in talks on Syria?
I'd like first to respond to the accusation. I think it's particularly naive and particularly foolish to think that we're not going to talk to Russia. The idea of a no-fly zone, realize that this is also something Hillary Clinton agrees with several on our side with. You're asking for a no-fly zone in an area in which Russia already flies. Russia flies in that zone at the invitation of Iraq. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you better know at least what we're getting into. So when you think it's going to be a good idea to have a no-fly zone of Iraq, realize that means you are saying we are going to shoot down Russian planes. If you're ready for that, be ready to send your sons and daughters to another war in Iraq. I don't want to see that happen. I think the first war in Iraq was a mistake. You can be strong without being involved in every civil war around the world.
And how would you respond?
Ronald Reagan was strong, but Ronald Reagan didn't.
And Ronald Reagan walked away at Reykjavik. He walked away. He quit talking when it was time to quit talking.
Can I finish with my time?
Why does she keep interrupting everybody?
Yeah.
Boy. Terrible.
Yeah, I'd like to finish my response, basically.
If I may respond.
This is an important question. This is an incredibly important question. And the question goes to be, who do we want to be our commander-in-chief? Do you want a commander-in-chief who says something that we never did throughout the entire Cold War, to discontinue having conversations with the Russians? I'm not happy about them flying over there, but I'm not naive enough to say, well, Iraq has them flying over their airspace. We're just going to announce that we're shooting them down. That is naive to the point of being something you might hear in junior high, but it's scary.
But if you're not going to respond in a no-fly zone strategy, what would yours be?
The first thing I would do is I wouldn't arm our enemies. I wouldn't arm ISIS. Most of the people who want the no-fly zone also favored arming the allies of al-Qaeda, which became ISIS. That was the dumbest, most foolhardy notion, and most of the people up here supported it. They wanted to arm the allies of al-Qaeda. Some of them still do. That's how ISIS grew. We pushed back Assad, and ISIS was allowed to grow in the vacuum. So the first thing you do is don't arm your enemies.
Well, I might just say it.
Senator Paul, you were one of 15 Republicans to vote for an amendment which states that human activity contributed to climate change. President Obama has announced an aggressive plan to cut carbon emissions. At the same time, energy production in America has boomed. Is it possible to continue this boom and move toward energy self-sufficiency while at the same time pursuing a meaningful climate change program?
The first thing I would do as president is repeal the regulations that are hampering our energy that the president has put in place, including the Clean Power Act. While I do think man may have a role in our climate, I think nature also has a role. The planet's 4.5 billion years old. We've been through geologic age after geologic age. We've had times when the temperature's been warmer. We've had times when the temperature's been colder. We've had times when the carbon in the atmosphere has been higher. So I think we need to look before we leap. President's often fond of saying he wants a balanced solution, but really we do need to balance both keeping the environment clean. We will have some rules for that. We got to balance that with the economy. He's devastated my state. I say the president is not only destroying Kentucky, he's destroying the Democrat Party down there because nobody wants to associate with him. So what we really need is somebody that understands that we do need energy of all forms. And that means we will have solar and wind and hydro, but we will still have coal and we still will have natural gas. And we've got to have an all of the above policy. But it would be a mistake to shut down all of our industries in the coal fields and shut down the coal-powered plants. If we did so, we're going to have a day where we wake up and some of our big cities are either very cold or very hot. So I think it's a big danger and we shouldn't do it. And what we should do is say we want all of the above. We want to free up the energy sector and let people produce, let them drill, let them explore.
Thank you, sir.
And Senator Paul, we will begin with you.
We're the richest, freest, most humanitarian nation in the history of mankind. But we also borrow $1 million a minute. And the question I have for all Americans is, think about it. Can you be a fiscal conservative if you don't conserve all of the money? If you're a profligate spender and you spend money in an unlimited fashion for the military, is that a conservative notion? We have to be conservative with all spending, domestic spending and welfare spending. I'm the only fiscal conservative on the stage.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Casey.
So that was the Rand Paul highlights there. And get into this other article here. I had a few. But this one, Rand Paul is right, the most economically unequal states are Democratic. During Tuesday night's Republican debate, Jared Baker, editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, posed a question to Senator Rand Paul: does it matter at all that the gap between the rich and everyone else is widening? It does, Paul replied. And then he pointed a finger. I think that we ought to look where income inequality seems to be the worst. It seems to be worst in cities run by Democrats, states run by Democrats, and countries currently run by Democrats, he said. Data from the Census Bureau suggests that, at least on the states, he's correct, since most large cities are run by Democrats, and only one country has a Democratic leader. We'll set those aside. At right is a chart showing each state's Gini coefficient in 2014 from the Census Bureau. And it ranks income inequality in a place on a scale from 0, no inequality, to 1, the maximum level of inequality. We've colored the boxes containing the numbers. This is from 2012. The District of Columbia is dark blue, meaning it's mostly Democratic. And it's 0.522. Remember, 1 is most and 0 is least inequality areas. Then we have New York, which is a little bit lighter shade of blue, but it's still 0.511. Connecticut, just even a little bit smaller shade, but it's 0.501. Then we have Louisiana, which it's a very pinkish shade. It's 0.49. And you have California, Massachusetts, Florida, and Rhode Island, which are all somewhat Democratic. They're light blue. Florida is kind of more of a neutral, but they're the 0.489 to 4.83. Texas, Tennessee, they're 0.483 to 481, and they're pink. You get down towards the bottom more, you have places like Arkansas, Kentucky, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and those get down to the lower 4.4 and 4.5, and sorry, I just had a wind warning. But you get down to the bottom where it's 4.2. You have Utah, Wyoming, which are pretty red. And what I've also noticed is the ability to act in a freer state of being tends to lean towards more redder states, but it's not always that case. Again, you look at the chart, you still have red states that are up there in the high numbers. You have a couple blue ones down towards the bottom of this chart. And again, this chart's at WashingtonPost.com. There is a more socialist aspect to the Democrats anymore, and it's pretty evident to most people. And we have the, I don't even know how to say this with a straight face, but the socialist anarchist. And that's kind of an oxymoron, so I don't see how that really works. They want anarchy, but they want to use government to have their... That's just communism and socialism. We do have the libertarians, which say no government, which I think is always a possibility if the human race decides they want to actually evolutionize within their thought process and all that. But again, I think, the Constitution is that stepping stone. Not an end all, but a stepping stone towards that in a more peaceful fashion than what you would see with some type of revolution that usually only ends up favoring more extremists that still are looking for power. We're going to get into another article here. Give me a second. I had it here on Drudge, but I'm probably getting back up. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to pop up here. Here we go. Maybe. Drudge does not want to work for me. I usually pull Drudge up on my phone just because it reloads so much. There we go. Okay. Now, this is something that I've been wanting to kind of get into. And this has to do with all the PC crap going on right now. And I have one from Truth and Media, too, that has to do with communications professor. But I have one here, and this one's from the National Review. Campus commotions show we're raising fragile kids. It seems like every week there's a new horror story of political correctness run amok at some college campus. A warning not to wear culturally insensitive Halloween costumes sparked an embroil at Yale, which went viral over the weekend. A lecturer asked in an email, "Is there no room anymore for a child to be a little bit obnoxious, a little bit inappropriate or provocative, or yes, offensive?" Students went ballistic when an administrator who is the lecturer's spouse defended free speech. Some students wanted his head. One student wrote in a Yale Herald op-ed, now taken down, "He doesn't get it, and I don't want to debate. I want to talk about my pain." Washington Post columnist and Tufts professor Daniel Princer was initially horrified by the spectacle, but ultimately backtracked, invoking Friedrich Hayek's insights from the use of knowledge in society. Drenzer cautions outside observers that there is an awful lot of knowledge that is local in character that cannot be culled from abstract principles or detached observers. As Hayek fanboy and champion of localism, I should be quite sympathetic, but this time I think Drenzer's initial reaction was closer to the mark. The notion that the Yale incident is an isolated one defies all the evidence. Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist, and Greg Lukianoff, president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, recently wrote a sweeping survey titled The Coddling of the American Mind for the Atlantic, in which they cataloged how students are being swaddled in an emotional cocoon. Taco bars at sorority fundraisers are considered offensive. A group at Duke University deemed phrases such as man up to horrible to tolerate, and so on. The suggestion that the tempest at Yale is an isolated incident reminds me of my favorite line from Thor. Some circumstantial evidence is very strong, as when you find a trout in the milk. So what is going on? Well, many conservatives want to pull all the blame on political correctness or cultural Marxism, and though I think much ideology certainly belong in the dock, political correctness is now quite old. Lamentations about it were commonplace when I was in college 25 years ago. Does anyone other than a few campus hotheads actually believe universities are more intolerant, bigoted, and racist than they were a generation ago? What has changed are students. Yes, there has been a lot of ideological indoctrination in which kids are taught that taking offense gives them power, but again, that idea is old. What's new is the way kids are being raised. Consider play. Children are hardwired to play. That's how we learn. But what happens when play is micromanaged? St. Lawrence University professor Stephen Horwitz argues that it undermines democracy. Free play, tag in the schoolyard, pick up basketball at the park, etc., is a very complicated thing. It requires young people to negotiate rules among themselves without the benefit of some third-party authority figure. These skills are hugely important in life. When parents or teachers short-circuit that process by constantly intervening to stop bullying or just make sure that everyone plays nice, Horowitz argues we are taking away a key piece of what makes it possible for free people to be peaceful, cooperative people, by devising bottom-up solutions to a variety of conflicts. The rise in helicopter parenting and the epidemic of everyone gets a trophy education are another facet of the same problem. We are raising millions of kids to be smart and kind, but also fragile. And what happens when large numbers of these delicate little flowers are set free to navigate their way through life? They feel unsafe and demand safe spaces. They feel threatened by uncomfortable ideas and demand trigger warnings. They might even want written rules or contracts to help them negotiate sexual relations. In other words, this is the generation the mandarins of political correctness have been waiting for. And let me go ahead and pull this other article up, and I have, again, another one here from Truth and Media. I wanted to get to this other one first here. Maybe. Sorry, my internet's slow today. We have high winds tonight, so... Okay. Now, we have this Mizzou hunger striker claims he's oppressed, rips white privilege. And it comes out that he comes from a family worth $20 million. This one came out of Gateway Pundits here on InfoWars too. His father is a railroad vice president and made over $8 million last year. He's a 1%er. Jonathan Butler, the University of Missouri graduate student who went on a weekend hunger strike, comes from a family worth $20 million. His father is a railroad vice president and made over $8 million last year. Butler complained about white privilege. He argued he was oppressed. And St. Louis Today reported Jonathan Butler, a central figure in the protests at the University of Missouri, is an Omaha native and the son of a railroad vice president. The Omaha World Herald reports Butler refused food last week in a move to force the university system's president, Timothy Wolf, from office. Wolf resigned Monday and Butler ended his hunger strike. Jonathan Butler played high school football at Omaha Central College, where he won state championship and earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Mizzou. The newspaper reports he is working towards a master's degree in educational leadership and policy. He's a member of a prominent Omaha family. The newspaper says that Butler's father, Eric L. Butler, executive vice president for sales and marketing of the Union Pacific Railroad, his 2014 compensation was $8.4 million, according to regulatory filings with the Security and Exchange Commission. And then I have another one here that I've seen out of InfoWars. Just got to get to it here. Okay. Just let it load here. What would be enough for the Missouri protesters? They have already forced out University of Missouri President Tim Wolf and Chancellor R. Bowen Lofton. Both of them were last seen groveling on their hands and knees, but on-campus protesters say that this is just the beginning. They are going to demand a lot more because you just keep folding. They're offended. Well, I'm offended by you being offended, so should we outlaw you? No, because that's not freedom, you idiots. Therefore, I have come up with the list of things that the university could do to appease them and convince them to end their protests, as an Olive Branch to protesters. The University of Missouri should implement all the following effective immediately. 1. Offer free tuition to all students of color regardless of their academic standing. Require that all white male students and faculty members wear the scarlet letters WMP for white male privilege on the front of their clothing at all times. Require that all white students and faculty members sign a written confession admitting that they are racist. Number 4, forbid professors from giving a failing grade to any student of color, or force all students and faculty members to wear allegiance to the Democratic Party. Guarantee that all African Americans will be selected to fill the vacated positions of President and Chancellor. 7. Award President Obama an honorary doctorate degree. 8. Reserve the valedictorian destination only for blacks, women, Hispanics, or the physically challenged. 9. Host a Quentin Tarantino Film Festival on campus annually and make attendance mandatory. Number 10. Offer Ghetto Sensitivity 101 and make it a required course for graduation. 11. Make it the official stance of the university be in favor of slave reparations. Number 12. Ban all current and former police officers from setting foot on campus. And what you have to understand about that is these are things that have been heard from a lot of these protesters of things that they're calling for, basically. They might not put it in these kind of satire type words, but they're basically saying these things. Now I want to go to this one here from Truth and Media. Mizzou communications professor resigns from appointment after threatening reporter. University of Missouri faculty member Melissa Clark apologized Tuesday night and resigned her courtesy appointment. And this is big because it's her courtesy appointment with the Missouri School of Journalism. But she's still a professor. David Corpus, dean of the journalism school at MU, posted the news to Twitter just before 9 p.m. Click's resignation came one day after she joined protesting students in the school's quadrangle who were angered over 2 incendiary on-campus incidents which led to the resignation of both the president of the school and later the chancellor. A courtesy appointment permits members of one academic department to serve on graduate committees for students from other academic departments. Click teaches the mass media in the communications department. The School of Journalism is separate from the communications department. Click and assistant director of Greek Life, Jana Bassler, were both captured on camera verbally intimidating student photographer Tim Tay, who is on a freelance assignment to cover the protests. Towards the tail end of the video, Click asks for Muscle to deal with the video maker, MU junior Mark Scherbecker. The video was later uploaded to YouTube. Yesterday was a historic day at MU, full of emotion and confusion. I have reviewed and reflected upon the video of me that is circulating and have written this statement to offer both apology and context for my actions, Click said in a statement released to the Columbia, Missouri on Tuesday afternoon by the College of Arts and Science. I have reached out to journalists involved to offer my sincere apologies and to express regret over my actions. I regret the language and strategies I used and sincerely apologize to the MU campus community and journalists at large for my behavior and also the way my actions have shifted attention away from the students' campaign for justice, she said in a statement. Tay told Huffington Post that Click had apologized to him and she was very gracious. I don't have and never had bad feelings against her and feel bad that she's been receiving threats and other nasty messages, Tay told Huffington Post. I wish she had handled the situation differently, but as a journalist, it really just became part of the scene I was presented with, and I never took her or anyone else's actions personally. Well, you kind of don't take them personally, but you hold them personally responsible for their actions. And you can forgive the person, but not the actions. And I think that's a hard thing for people to understand. You can forgive the person. The person has the right to move on past their mistakes, but you don't forgive the action. The actions aren't forgiven. Forgiving the action basically says you can continue to make those actions. Forgiving the person says, listen, you're a good person. You can do what, things are possible for you. You can make it. You can, accomplish a lot. But those type of actions aren't acceptable. I'm not going to hold them against you, the rest of the time, but, if you keep doing the same thing, I'm going to hold you to that same level. And, we're all guilty of doing something that's not quite, right. We make our mistakes. But do you learn from them? And I don't think people like her, she's saying that to make her look better, I believe. But her further actions down the road, her teaching, what she teaches down the road, all have something to do with it. Those all will say, well, she's not sincere about changing. She's only sorry that she was caught. Okay, I want to go ahead, move on to one here. We're going to go ahead and get into this Ron Paul Liberty report. NATO admits Afghan mission failure.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and it's good to see you again, Daniel.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Subject today is Afghanistan. It's been a subject on this program quite a few times. Is it any wonder? We've been fighting a war over there for 14 years, and it doesn't look like it's ending real soon. Matter of fact, the president recently boosted the numbers of troops who would be there. 140,000 at one time, down to 14,000. He was going to have 8,000, and he goes on and on. So there's a change, though, and we have an article. Changing information coming from NATO leaders, because this is not a U.S. war. We just pay for it and die for it and direct it, but it's NATO's war, that peace organization. So they're complaining now. There are signs that they're wearing down. The one article at Reuters was NATO ponders future of Afghan mission as fatigue, frustration mounts. Well, it ought to after 14 years, longer than Vietnam, and we ought to be fatigued. But for some reason, one reason why the American people aren't outraged, they're getting there, but we don't have a draft. We don't have as many Americans dying, but it's still a very devastating process, and it should wake up our government and our political leaders and the people in this country that there's something deeply flawed in here. And in the article, they stated a NATO official, that said that we need advice. We need to get some robust advice. So let's consider giving those clowns a little bit of advice on how they ought to be acting when it comes to Afghanistan.
Stay out is good advice. But
that's simple, but that's obviously the case.
But after 14 years, that NATO's involved in training and advising the Afghan army, which doesn't really exist. It's probably in worse shape than the Iraqi army was before it turned and ran. But here's a great quote from the same general. It's a German general, General Lothar Domrose, Hans Lothar Domrose, who said, "If we don't stay, they will drift into a maelstrom. There is a significant danger that they will get torn away." So 14 years.
Yeah. And guess what? The clock runs on the spending clock, too. You know, it's not cheap. But that doesn't bother the military-industrial complex, and it seems like from recent events we've seen on the debates, it doesn't seem to bother either party that the military-industrial complex is well protected. And so they have no complaints. So it's well over $1 trillion now. But we never know when it'll end if you're talking about dollars. But, of course, there's a lot of lives been destroyed. Our side as well as the other side. I mean, how many lives did the Afghan people lose? And they weren't all people that had been dedicated to the destruction of America. A lot of them, matter of fact, the purpose of Taliban is just to kick foreigners out. It's not to come over here and drop bombs on us. So this whole idea, these games that we play, they think that, well, if we tinker around the edges and we train people and do certain things, maybe there'll be more success. But you know, one thing, I don't believe they're going to have success tinkering around with the way they're managing things. But the one thing that they don't ever talk about is what's the downside? What's the unintended consequences? What is the blowback potential? Because they do get sick and tired. And then the other question now, and it's part of this debate, is where does Russia fit in? Russia's been on the receiving end of NATO for a long time, and maybe they'll be satisfied where the lines are drawn in Europe, but I don't think they're satisfied about the east and going east. So they might be just paying a lot more attention to what's going on in Afghanistan.
Well, Afghanistan is not in our backyard, but it definitely is in Russia's backyard. And, I think people may forget, that we went into Afghanistan in the direct response to 9/11 because the Taliban government had allowed al-Qaeda to train there. But the Taliban were not our enemies. They didn't attack us. They didn't participate in 9/11. Yet, even once we went in and got all of the al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan, we stayed there to fight the Taliban. And while there was no, we got rid of al-Qaeda, there was no ISIS in Afghanistan. Now we're seeing that ISIS is starting to blow things up in Afghanistan. It's moving into Afghanistan. So as you point out with Russia, that just lends them some more reason to be nervous about what's happening to the failed state called Afghanistan.
And it seems like they have a more precise philosophy than when you have so many different countries coming together and they're not precise. And I'm talking about NATO. How can NATO represent U.S. national security? And yet they're supposed to be doing this. And yet they can't possibly do this because it's only the American people who can really speak on this. But it's this idea of having a war, but it's not a war. They don't declare war. It's just like we go over there and we overthrow dictators, not only in Afghanistan, but Iraq, the whole mess. We have wars. We don't call them wars. We don't follow the rules. If there is a war, it's supposed to be declared by, the Congress and the people, and that never happens. That has to have something to do with the lack of knowing when you win. Without debating the pros and cons of World War I and World War II on, what could have been done, but at least the philosophy there was that if there was a determined enemy that was, posing a threat, that a war could be declared, and they knew exactly when the war would be over. Mm-hmm. But in this case, they don't have the vaguest idea. So the frustration that they have, I don't think they should be surprised.
But part of the reason is NATO's drift. NATO was conceived as a defensive alliance against the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. But at the end of '89, when that dissolved, just as the Warsaw Pact dissolved, NATO should have dissolved. But instead, they went looking for more missions, and they became not only an aggressive force. The first attempt was in Serbia when they led the bombing of Serbia, which is a country that had not attacked anyone. And then they moved on out of Europe, and they're involved everywhere, Asia, Africa. So NATO lost its way. just goes to show that government programs will never shut down. There are a lot of good jobs and a lot of goodies for these people.
Okay, I think you and I certainly could agree on the advice that we could give those who are seeking advice. Dissolve NATO. And of course, I'd bring all the troops home too. But recently I saw an interview of a former NATO Secretary General, Rasmussen. Mm-hmm. And I found it rather interesting because he was being interviewed by, it looked more like Mid-Easterners, and they were sharp and they were determined. They didn't allow him to get off the hook, but they were anti-war and they were anti-NATO. And they said, what good have you done? And they listed all the times at NATO, whether it was Syria or whether it was Libya or Ukraine and all these places, total failure. He couldn't deny that. He said, yes, that is true. It's total chaos. But we did our job. We are a military operation, and we're out there to get rid of these terrible people and get rid of the dictator. And they came back and he said, well, yeah, but you're leaving chaos there. It's turmoil. And he said, yes, but that's not our fault. He stuck to his guns. He says, that's not our fault. It's up to the civilian people to come in and establish their governments after we have blown up their first government. So it was just unbelievable where this thinking comes from. I don't know whether they have just brainwashed themselves or think that that's a possibility, that you blow up a government, no matter what the pros and cons are, but that it's just going to be automatic that people will rise up. And yeah, they rise up, and you have 14 different groups, and they all want our money, and they all want our support. And then they wonder why it's failure, why it's frustration, why there's fatigue, and why it's costing us a lot of money.
And they pretend that they weren't the ones pushing for war. But if you look at Rasmussen, go back and look at the speeches he gave in advance of Libya. Look at Stoltenberg, the current Secretary General of NATO. Both of these people are extremely political figures. They push these wars. They push the Libya war based on a lie. And then they step back and say, hey, it's not our fault that it's a disaster.
Yeah, and there's be nothing we should say about the European nations getting together, and dealing with this, but we don't need to be involved in it. But, the NATO-backed problem that we're all facing now in Ukraine, of course, we participated in getting rid of one leader and ushering in a new one. But this just sort of, prompts Russia to become more aggressive. Why out of the clear blue a year or so ago, we decided to just antagonize and provoke Russia. And now, we put our missiles right up on their borders. And then they give this cockamamie lie. Oh, we're going to stop the Korean missiles from overflowing. They're going to put them in Eastern Europe. I mean, it's insane. And then what does Russia say? Russia says they don't have the anti-ballistic missiles, but we do have offensive weapons, and we're going to have them here in case you guys mess around. This is our only defense. So it just goes back and forth. It just seems so unnecessary for all the provoking, since there was a relative breathing area after the Soviets collapsed. I mean, we were trading. We still do some of this trading. And yet it just seemed like somebody was obsessed with, we can't allow this to happen. We have to stop this. We have to have an enemy, a constant enemy.
Well, the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said in his confirmation hearing that Russia is the greatest existential threat to us, more than ISIS. But it's funny what you said about NATO. It's not our business to reconstruct, to fix these things. But I don't even know what's worse, whether NATO would do it or how we're doing it. You and I both followed this story about this $43 million gas station that the Defense Department built in Afghanistan. And it should have cost, according to local costs, less than $500,000 to build this. But construction costs and supervision costs and everything, all of a sudden it's a compressed natural gas station in a small village in Afghanistan that this agency, Task Force for Business and Stability Operations, determined that would be good for the local economy. So they built it. They wasted $43 million. And as our friend Peter Van Buren points out, the Afghans aren't going to be able to use it because their cars use gasoline. To convert their cars to use compressed gas will cost $700 per car, but they only make $690 a year.
Of course, an incident like that is important to point out because you can comprehend it. But that's peanuts compared to, remember the truckloads of money that they hauled into Iraq and they passed it out? And how about the hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend to train 5 people who surrender and all the weapons we buy? The whole thing is nuts. And if the American people would only get this information, and tragically, there's so little real debate on this. So what do? We hear almost all of the Republican candidates talking this way, but then you have Hillary. And she supports it too. She's a wilder hawk than some of the Republicans.
And somehow you're weak on defense if you oppose these truckloads of money that that I think Rand pointed out last night. This weakens us. If you want to have a strong military and a strong country, you can't hemorrhage money like this while antagonizing people.
The only thing that I think is worthwhile exporting would be a good philosophy, a philosophy of liberty. At one time we had a bit of that in this country. We believed in sound money and free markets and contracts and civil liberties. And those are good things. And if we could only practice what we preach or pretend that we can force on other people, maybe we would have a thriving economy. Maybe we wouldn't be number 20th in the world for defense of liberty. If we did that and showed what kind of prosperity could come, maybe somebody would want to voluntarily emulate us. That is what we need. But this whole idea that we can spread American exceptionalism with a gun, and besides, it's no longer exceptional in the positive way when we think we can do it this way. So this is going to end. It's leading to the bankruptcy. I'm delighted that the NATO leaders now are frustrated. They don't know what to do, and they're looking for advice. So I strongly give their advice. Just disband and send everybody home. And, of course, the only policy that we might have any direct relationship with would be an American policy. I think we should be out of NATO. Robert Taft advised we never join, and this is the result of it. It's just provoking wars unnecessarily and subsidizing the military-industrial complex. No more war profiteering. That should be our slogan. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, and also you can check them out, ronpaullibertyreport.com, for more libertarian commentary. Now, we might have NATO admitting that Afghan was a failure, but of course we still have the warmongers here in America pushing war after war. Not only was Afghan a failure, Iraq was a failure, Libya was a failure, Egypt was a failure. Egypt wasn't a military thing by us. It was more of a coup. Multiple coups, really, and a fight between American interests and extremist interests, not the moderate Egyptians. But we have Pentagon here, Kurt Nimmo, Pentagon, out of Infowars.com. Pentagon, Syria to be occupied and governed with boots on the ground. Deborah Lee James, Secretary of the United States Air Force, admitted on Tuesday the endgame for Syria occupation and governing Syrians who have not fled to Europe. James said air power can't do everything, and it cannot occupy territory, and very importantly, it cannot govern territory. This is where we need to have boots on the ground. We do need to have ground forces in this campaign. In other words, the plan is to occupy land of a sovereign nation, either with U.S. troops or proxies, Free Syrians and the Kurds, she said, and govern this captured land as the United States and its partners see fit. According to establishment's newspaper of record, the New York Times, this is a combined diplomatic and military approach to force President Bashar al-Assad to leave office and end the carnage. James did not mention the lack of carnage prior to the U.S. engineered Arab Spring and collusion by the United States and the Gulf Emirates, along with Turkey, to overthrow the Syrian government. Also omitted is the fact that the U.S. planned to oust al-Assad as far back as 2006. As we know, the DIA would prefer a Salafist principality in Syria. In other words, it will strive to impose an Islamic monarchical state government. Sorry, lights are flickering a little bit here. It's getting pretty windy out there, so hopefully you don't lose me. In other words, it will strive to impose an Islamic monarchical state governed by Salafist fanatics. That is to say, Gulf Emirates-styled Wahhabism, enforcing a strict and puritanical interpretation of Islam. If successful, with Russia now backing al-Assad, this seems increasingly unlikely. Syrians are those remaining can look toward Libya for a glimpse of the future. After NATO and the United States defeated Muammar Gaddafi and had him murdered, the country descended into chaos as rebels of the Salafist variety fought against the new government and each other. Prior to the invasion, the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya boasted one of the highest standards of living in Africa. Now Libya is barely a country at all, where an array of militias terrorize the country's 6 million citizens, plunder and remains of the country's wealth, ruin what little is left of its infrastructure, and torture and kill wherever they are in the ascendancy. This is essentially what Miss James is talking about, the destruction and balkanization of Syria along with ethnic and religious lines, creating a devastated country stripped of a large number of Syrians and those unfortunate enough to remain suffering under intolerant and murderous Salafist fanatics. In short of that, the artificial coalescence of small fiefdoms fighting between each other, see Libya, and terrorizing the population, or those who have not escaped to Germany to live on welfare. And I think getting rid of NATO is something that we all should hope for. But it doesn't seem likely, definitely with the Warhawks and the pushing towards this world government. It really seems we're on that path more and more. Whether it be the TPP or any of these other little deals that we make, without any discussion at all, constantly making these secret deals. They're treaties. They're treaties, but they don't call them treaties. So, well, we don't have to go through the means of getting this treaty ratified. You know, we were taught that, you know, treaties are ratified in, you know, government classes in high school. I mean, I doubt they even teach that stuff anymore. But now we look and we just see them changing the name, and all of a sudden, bam, you know, they don't have to ratify anything. Okay, I want to get to this next article here. And this one, Senate passes revised military spending bill Obama will sign. And it's originally out at antiwar.com. You can also find it at Truth and Media. In a 91-3 vote, the Senate has approved the revised military spending bill for 2016 that was also passed by the House last week. The bill offered less than 1% cuts from the previous bill and retained restrictions on releasing Guantanamo Bay detainees. Though it had previously threatened a veto of the bill, the White House today affirmed the president will sign the bill as currently presented, suggesting the trivial cuts were sufficient. Likely, however, the shift is a function of both houses having a veto-proof majority on the bill. Previous suggestions were that someone in the Senate wanted to revise the bill to open up more avenues for releasing Gitmo detainees, though this ultimately did not happen, and the White House seems to be totally fine with it, despite complaining for months about those restrictions. Instead, the White House now says they want cooperation on Congress on closing Guantanamo Bay, but that they intend to keep this totally separate from the military spending bill, which itself has for years been chock full of restrictions on the promised closure. So, again, we're pouring out money for all these military operations. And what do we get out of it? Do you feel safe? I'll tell you what, more people, I think, probably would say they feel unsafe nowadays. We spend all this money, we send all these people overseas to fight people that weren't attacking the U.S., weren't doing anything to us. They die. We lose people there. We have a militarized, federalized police force here in America, more and more, that a lot of people feel threatened. Minorities have felt threatened for a long time. I think they're very, very misguided by political interests, definitely by these socialist and communist parties. But there are, places where it's not that it's a minority that they're attacking. They attack the poor. They attack the poor everywhere. Let's say a nearby city that I live by, you can kind of go into the more white ghetto areas and they are, targeted. You go into the more, black communities, they're targeted. If they're the poor communities, as long as it's poor, and you're going to find minorities and whites and, Asians, there's poor communities that have all these people, and they're all targeted. Why? Well, it's really simple. Definitely if you look at it from a power structure and a revenue structure. When you look at the people that we have in power, we have people that truly have seek power over others and a elitist, godlike stature they feel godlike over people. They have the ability to go, bam, you're now a criminal because I just outlawed what you do. Kiss the boot. Hand over this. You're not allowed to do this anymore. Submit to me. They get off this power trip. And when it gets down to the level of, targeting the minority. Well, one, if you have people that are struggling, you have more chances of drug abuse or alcohol abuse because people getting depressed, and a lot more it's pharmaceutical abuse because they go to a doctor, and while a doctor can't fix the fact that you're being held down, so many restrictions give very few people the ability to rise up, and become something, make something of themselves. Not saying it's impossible, it's just harder. You can't have, a whole bunch of people, definitely when you have a corporatism type government, or even a socialist type, any type of communist, anything that gives people power over others. And you look at how they target them, they put them in a system that they make money off of. Whether it's you having to be on probation, you have to constantly pay. That's revenue. And they constantly try to bust you for everything while you're on probation to continue your probation. And if they want, they can stick you into a private prison that gets subsidies and usually has agreements with the local government in a way that makes it, hey, you have to, we'll build this prison here, and we'll take some taxpayer money to help build that, and we'll invest some money to help build that, but you have to agree to keep it occupied to this standard, to keep that revenue rolling in so they can profit off of it. So you have situations where you don't make a whole bunch of money. You can't, pay big contributions to these politicians. You're not a large revenue source that way. So basically, you can't pay for your freedom. But they can profit off of you in other ways. And it's all a cycle that will not end until we start looking at more libertarian ideas when it comes to government and what they should be involved in. The drug war. Look at the drug war. Drug war has gotten so out of hand. I mean, when you see children getting flashbang, oh, wrong house, sorry, and they laugh about it. When you see local cops working with the feds to bring down crime, do they usually bring down crime? I'll tell you one thing that war on drugs has done. It's made the most violent people some of the most wealthy black market people off of things like that. Because it drives it into the black market, causes a lot of warring. We don't see it like we do with prohibition of alcohol. Why? Because the prohibition of alcohol, the main people were here in America. They were making the alcohol here. They were transporting it here. All of that crime was here. Where we have a lot of drugs that come in from Mexico and South America. Those are where the drug lords are. That's where all the violence is. But you have to also look on the other hand, we have that violence here if you include law enforcement. When they're willing to break into someone's home because they think he bought I think it was a joint. I can't remember right offhand, so don't quote me on that. But it was a very, very small amount. So they raided the guy's home, shot the dog in front of the little kid, and never did find anything. justifying it because, well, we got to go after the bad people that do drugs. And apparently this was also someone that was working, providing for his family, had a home, but he was bad because, well, he bought a joint or a joint's worth. That's really sad. Let me see if I can find this article. Okay, here is one. Lawsuit, FBI raided New Mexico home with sleeping children. This was originally out of Associated Press. It's on InfoWars. Agents blindly detonated multiple explosive devices, inflicting shrapnel wounds and severe emotional trauma against children. A new federal lawsuit says FBI agents used military-grade stun grenades against 3 sleeping children during a 2013 pre-dawn raid of a New Mexico home. The lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court in Albuquerque this week alleges that agents blindly detonated multiple explosive devices during the raid, inflicting shrapnel wounds and severe emotional trauma against the children. The lawsuit says the children were ages 9, 10, and 12 at the time. Sorry. According to court documents, FBI agents were investigating the children's father, Abel Ramirez Sr., who federal authorities suspected of being a drug dealer in Anthony, New Mexico. Attorney Richard Rosenstock says the raid was cruel and recklessly. FBI spokesman Frank Fisher says he is looking into the lawsuit, but the agent doesn't comment on pending litigation. But they don't care. They don't look at that. That's not a big deal to them. Because they're convinced they're keeping you safe a lot of times, but they're not. And then other ones really are just blind with power. I was trying to find this one. I'm not finding it quite yet. Here it is. It was in Truth and Media. I was looking wrong place first. Pot advocacy group alleges death threats issued by drug cartel. The marijuana legalization advocacy group Responsible Ohio has been reportedly threatened, stalked, and victimized by thefts and cyber attacks at the hands of local drug cartel. According to Fox 19, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Secret Service have investigated the threats and are taking them seriously. One suspect who allegedly stole $200,000 from the organization's bank account before being caught by law enforcement attempted to steal additional $300,000 is in custody. Responsible Ohio Executive Director Ian James said law enforcement was pretty clear that this was a pretty heavy-duty drug dealer. The fact that he was also an arms dealer gave them great pause and indicated that we should be concerned. Officers reportedly found a photograph of Ian James' husband standing outside a building in Cleveland on the suspect. In the above embedded WCPO video, sports agent and Responsible Ohio co-founder James Gold describes chilling recorded death threats that he allegedly received via burner cell phones from members of a drug cartel. We're going to play that here. And the drug cartels don't want the legalization of marijuana because, again, they want that money. And when it's illegal, the true criminals are usually in power. Here we go.
Basically, what it was we're going to F you up. Why are you doing this? We're going to F you up. I mean, and it was a recorded voice because it happened on 3 different occasions. And it happened about 3 weeks apart from different numbers that were from what we found out to be burner cell phones, which is typically the trade of a cartel. It was scary, not so much for me as it was for my kids. At the same time, Ian was threatened, particularly with one gentleman that was arrested who had a picture in his wallet and a gun and had narcotic felony arrests. And that gentleman was from Parma, Ohio, and was eventually arrested. That same group broke into our internet, and that occurred right at the time when we had to get our supplemental signatures. And they stole $300,000 from us. Wow. From the bank. And so what occurred was we lost certainly a day and a half of those 10 days when we had to make up 35,000 signatures. So we found it kind of ironic that it was happening when we were at a very squeezed time, and we put 24-hour protection around our offices. This was an attempt by them to hit our offices in Columbus.
Now, who else do we usually see working with drug cartels? We tend to also see maybe government agencies so they can, so-called infiltrate the drug cartels or, wage their own war on drugs. But then, we find out, with the Rick Ross story that he was being supplied the whole time by the CIA, basically. It's something that we tend to be held back for the profit of criminals until the criminals no longer have a use to government. Then they're willing to throw them under the bus too. Now here's something. Police department says it would rather have a good relationship with the community than cheap military gear. Oh yeah, Tech Dirt. Here's something worth reading. The Burlington, Vermont Police Department has announced it will no longer be participating in the Department of Defense's 1033 program. This program is a well-intentioned effort to somehow make use of excess old military inventory. Unfortunately, along with desks, computers, file cabinets, and other office staples, the government also allows police departments to pick up mine-resistant vehicles, assault rifles, grenade launchers, and other military gear, often at a steep discount that made even more inexpensive by Homeland Security grants. The full press release by them says several things those within the jurisdiction need to hear, along with the rest of the nation's law enforcement agencies, via information liberation. The Burlington Police Department announced today that the department has severed its ties with the much scrutinized 1033 program, a Department of Defense initiative that allows aging military equipment to be repurposed for domestic policing. Until the summer, the Burlington Police Department possessed 2 military-issued night vision devices, which were the extent of its holdings under the Department of Defense's DoD program. The militarization of local police departments is a genuine concern in our nation, said Burlington Chief of Police Brandon Del Pozo. There are times when military-style equipment is essential for public safety, but they are very rare. Between our partners in the Vermont State Police and the Vermont National Guard, as well as other federal and local agencies, the Burlington Police Department partners with, we have the resources to handle all but the most inconceivable public safety scenarios. Amassing a worst-case scenario arsenal of military equipment results in officers seeing everyday police work through a military lens. When I realized that a small role the military played in equipping our police, I concluded it was better to return the items and let our 1033 program memorandum of understanding expire. The Burlington Police Department has no plans to acquire tactical or military items beyond the types of conventional policing equipment it already possesses. Mayor Mero Weinberger offered his support of this decision. Today's announcement cements that Burlington Police Department's long-standing practice of avoiding the use of military equipment. In contrast to many other police departments, our focus instead is on the basics of good policing in the 21st century: foot patrols, strong relationships between the officers and the community, and the use of modern tools to increase public transparency and police effectiveness. One thing should be clarified: the 1033 program is by no means mandatory. Severing ties really means just deciding not to participate. The MOU may have expired, but it could have run on forever without the PD feeling obligated to order anything from the 1033 catalog. What's important are the sentiments expressed by the Burlington Police Chief. He recognizes that acquiring military gear only leads to a military mindset that turns public servants into invading force. Even better, Del Pozo recognizes that using worst-case scenarios as justifications for heavily armored vehicles and military weaponry is a bullshit tactic. Have we seen time and time again, local law enforcement will claim anything and everything is a potential terrorist target so they can acquire cheap MRAPs and M4A1 rifles. Del Pozo isn't going to take his force down a similar path. And it goes on. Again, that was out of Tech Dirt. Police department says it would rather have a good relationship with the community than cheap military gear. And, I hope that's a path that we go down even further. Will it? I don't know, but we should go down that a lot further. What you can do is definitely, again, look at your sheriff's department, because you at least have the ability to vote, and the sheriff makes that decision, you know. And guess what? You get a vote. You don't have to vote for a mayor and hope the mayor picks the right police chief in, because they appoint those people. You can't go, well, if that police chief does this, I'll vote him out of office. You can vote the mayor, but will the next mayor just keep that same police chief? A lot of times that actually happens. Now, if I can find it here. I'm having a hard time finding it. Probably got de-subscribed to it or something. I don't know. That's happened a few times. Now, we all remember Jade Helm. Yeah, Jade Helm, the conditioning of military operating in the U.S., which many people were talking about. Well, Next News Network, Jade Helm returns. And I'm going to play this. This was breaking. It was 15 hours ago, but I want to play this because this is pretty important. And you look at Jade Helm. It hyped people up. And then nothing. Well, this will be a conditioning. They'll hype people up, then nothing. Hype people up, then nothing. The next operation, no one gets hyped up, and something happens. But let's go ahead and get into this breaking report from Next News Network. Breaking: Jade Helm returns as UX-16 takes Bastrop, Texas into martial law.
So what did we learn from Jade Helm 15? More importantly, what did the government learn? Apparently not enough, because in March of 2016, U.S. Special Forces are redeploying to Texas under a new code name, UX-16, short for Unconventional Warfare Exercise 2016. Unlike Jade Helm 15, where military contractors and officers presented their plans for public scrutiny, UX-16 was approved by commissioners in secret without public input, effectively handing over Bastrop County, Texas to the U.S. military without public consent. When the people are removed from the public debate over military operations within their own county limits, effectively, martial law has been declared. In the case of Jade Helm UX-16, the citizens of Bastrop County don't even know. Now, according to reports, UX-16 will be even more covert than Jade Helm 15, operating on privately owned properties in the county and at Camp Swift. County Judge Paul Pape told the press he is in full support of the next phase of military operations in Bastrop, as he indicated there were, quote, no incidents during Jade Helm, despite one local eyewitness, Brian Hohenstein, who stated, we saw a few more uniforms in restaurants and in the Walmart. Unfortunately for Hohenstein, his response indicates Jade Helm 15 was a successful conditioning exercise. No wonder the military is returning. Judge Pape's only concern was the public outcry and paranoia surrounding Jade Helm 15, and he hopes that the military planners have a better containment policy than last time. He was clear to issue a directive to Special Forces to subdue the new name for the operation and refrain from labeling Texas as hostile territory. Little is known about UX-16 at this time other than it kicks off in March of 2016 and will be even more covert than Jade Helm. Unfortunately for Judge Pape and the Bastrop commissioners, the cat is out of the bag. Fortunately for the free people of Texas, we're getting the word out. We'll monitor military chatter to bring you the latest on this developing story. Please distribute this news alert to your social networks and subscribe to our YouTube channel for the updates. This has been a Next News Network special report. I'm Gary Franchi.
Next News Network. Now, doesn't it seem that we're getting hyped up to be ready for major war? War against other countries and war at home. Will they use the cover of war around the world as a way to go after people in the U.S.? Call you a terrorist, call you a spy. Claim you're doing treasonous things and round people up that way. Look what happened during our nice World War II, where we interned Japanese United States citizens because they were Japanese. Well, now we live in a day where, well, you couldn't single out just a race. Maybe white people. Because, well, they got all the politically correct people hating on white privilege. They're not the only ones helping push this. We also, have these missiles. I kind of want to talk about this real quick. That the two missiles launched that were seen in California. Why they were diverting traffic from LAX in that area so they could do these exercises that they told no one about and launched where everybody could see it. It wasn't like they launched it in the day where maybe it wouldn't have been seen as easily. Instead, it lights up the sky and makes people think UFO or something. They don't know what the hell is going on. They don't know if they're under attack. What's going on? Conditioning using fear, maybe. Pushing that fear factor. And then you have, other countries kind of sticking up for themselves in a way. Also pushing their power in a global way. Where Russia reveals secret nuke-armed drone sub. Top article on Drudge right now. It's getting to a point where I see people going, we need to build up this military. We need to become the force. We need to kick Russia's butt, China's butt, and we need to, I like Trump. Trump's not going to be able to do all that. I don't think Trump has the inclination to go, hey, we probably should pull troops out of a lot of these countries like Germany and other countries so we can protect ourselves and not be offensive, but just defensive. We could still patrol waters. We can still, that our founding fathers, they didn't want a standing army. They wanted a standing navy to be able to protect the waters around the United States. You had militias, basically the people of the states that in a time of a crisis, they would come together and grab their guns and protect freedom. But we lose that because a lot of times, instead of just breaking barriers that have been in place, racism, all these, we have people that manipulate it and say, the freedoms of these people are the reason you're held down, rather than you're just being held down by the greedy people, so you can't have that. But, even people like Martin Luther King, even though he didn't believe in violence, you understand that you still have a need and a right to defend yourself. He tried to get a permit to buy a gun. He wanted to buy a gun to protect himself. He was denied. The right to self-defense is not something that should be granted to people. But a lot of times, they push propaganda. They might try to convince you, well, it was a white man with a gun, so we outlaw the guns, and the white man ain't got the gun. Well, then, you find out, well, it's the police department that has all the guns, and, well, sometimes you find out that, hey, most of your police department is basically all white in minority areas. Guess what? They got guns. They don't want you to feel empowered to defend yourself in a peaceful manner. When you are not a offense type person, you're a defense type person, where you don't go around looking for problems, but problems come find you, you can defend yourself. They fight that because they want you dependent on them. What you end up finding out is you can't rely on them. And when you give all the power to one group, what ends up happening? That one group ends up using that power for corruption, for beneficiary purposes. And again, they end up profiting off you. Not only, putting you in the system, keeping you in the system, look at asset forfeiture, where they can just take your property, not charge you with a crime, not have to give it back. There's a few articles I didn't get a chance to get into. You can find them at Drudge Report. Two of them that I did want to try to get to, but won't have the time to cover them all. Oil battle, Saudi Arabia risks destroying OPEC and feeding ISIS monster. And Saudi Arabia's manifesto for change in face of coup plots. Then you also have the stuff going on because of these wars in the Middle East that does cause people to flee and also allows the bad people also to infiltrate areas. Over in Europe, German poll calls for compulsory labor to service migrants. Nightclub bans refugees for harassing women. Hungary won't take single Syrian. Slovenia erects fence along border. EU flag burn as tens of thousands join Warsaw nationalist demonstration. We also hear about Nazism growing. And again, it's this divide and conquer when you force these extremely tense situations to cause a breakdown in society because you then are justified in coming in and using force. And then you can push more and more regulations and laws. That's what these young, fragile kids on these campuses don't understand. They're being used. Their parents tried, but in a way failed. But, trying is never failing. But they didn't have an understanding. We did have a very crazy culture where we've seen a lot of these young kids pampered so much that they can't handle the outside world. And, I seen it in my generation, but the generation that, came after me, the next 5 to 10 years after I was out of high school, I started really noticing the culture changing. And I even seen it in the pushing in the media, don't turn your back on your kid. Don't let your kid walk down the street. And then we come up with this term for normal parenting, and we call it free ranging. Have free range kids. No, that's not free. Why are we having terms for what used to be normal? We have coddled society so much that that's what allows this type of ideological restriction to clamp down on society with this political correctness. That offends me, this offends me, this offends me. But it's so easy to turn it on them, but they still don't, well, no, I'm right and you're wrong type attitude, which is, again, very, very telling that, they are so fragile that they will not let go of that ideology because they are fragile. They don't want to be offended. Oh, you can be offended, so then, and, not be so fragile, then I should be allowed to be fragile and not be offended. That's how they feel. And it's really getting out of control to the point that we have to realize. You look at, just like the professor that was bullying the reporter. Look what they teach. Mass media. Things like that. You also find those type of very, very far socialist, communist type people teaching the politics, teaching the sociology, the psychology. These are the people that are diagnosing your kids with problems. These are the people that are going to be making policy. These are the people that are going to be shaping the media. Thank y'all.